Hi, I'm Carl Glassford, art instructor at Golden West College. We're here today interviewing Dennis Brown, who is an illustrator dealing primarily with automotive or transportation art. Now, define that. What is an illustrator that only deals with automotive or transportation art?
Define. Well, we just deal with, you just answered the question. Right
Cars
there.
and trucks and planes and that sort of thing.
And ships and boats and trains. And
But that's become your trademark, or you're known for that. Obviously,
yes.
you can draw other things, but your
That's
automotive pieces precede your reputation. Right?
This is correct. I specialize in mostly automotive and train art.
When
actually.
you draw something, for example, pick up this red piece here, and when you get into automotive illustration, that requires the car itself. Did you have that car with you, or did you photograph it? What started this illustration?
This started up at Pebble Beach. I photographed it. The car belongs to a radio disc jockey in San Diego, and it almost became a commission piece. He said he wanted it painted, so I took a photograph of this, and I brought it back. And
what made you decide, like the grill, I can see some of the segments left out, some of them not. That's obviously a design situation.
That's
how
the way.
do you
That's the
figure
way.
that out?
How do you figure it out? It's inbred in myself. It's just a design thing that happens within myself. Instinctively, I know what to leave out and what to put in.
You're using inks, transparent inks, and India ink. As you start this, maybe you pick up that other piece and show us the starting piece that Jaguar. Now this is the initial drawing.
Yes.
From the car itself.
This is, I usually start with a basic line drawing using sepia inks, like Pelican inks, in a rapidograph type pen. And do the illustration on there using an opaque projector.
So you take the photograph of the car and project that in there, and then you redraw the car from
Right.
your reference material, the photograph.
It's simply not just tracing, though. You've got to work design into this piece. You've got to expand onto the creativity of it.
Well, I can see your reflections as they start there. That's going to be pretty dynamic as the car goes.
Yes.
And the use of the light on the grill, the darks no light, that works pretty well.
Yeah, I have this thing usually figured out in my head color-wise before I ever start coloring it. And
Do you make color sketches to give yourself, of course the car is a color and you have to deal with that.
That's correct. Usually I'll do a 10-minute color comp just to satisfy myself, so I'm trying to get a good color range from like warm to cool. And
now you're working on vellum, which is unusual for illustrators from your background and in architectural rendering. Is that where that comes from?
That's right. That's where I thought, geez, if it works for architectural rendering, it's going to work for me in the automotive or transportation field.
But it gives you a soft look and the transparency of those inks.
That's right. And not only that, it's great for if they have to peel it to be scanned, because it takes 2 to 3 days to get a 4x5 transparency of these things sometimes, and they just do not have time for that anymore.
Now it may be hard to see in this, but you've got this really great house in the background and a couple of people. Your backgrounds, what decides you on that? How do you come to that conclusion?
I just thought that this car should be in a setting with an old English type home. The car is really a model made for America here, but I put it back in an old English scene with 2 English gentlemen talking about the automobile and its country estate or whatever.
So the setting
is very important with the whole creativity.
Now this next Jaguar that is more finished in color, is that the same car?
No, it's a 120 Jaguar, XK 120 Jaguar.
But
different view. No,
this is different car, different view.
Different car, different view. Style. This is the rear view.
Now, in this one, you've got your base inks down on top of the drawing to form the. You do that with a brush, right?
The first thing is the line drawing, of course, like I just showed you before, and the next step is to take. You work just like a watercolor. You do all your little darks and so forth, and all your drippiness here, just like you handle a watercolor. And at the end, what I do, I tint it with an airbrush, just so slightly, to get these nice, cool to warm.
So you put on a frisket over the whole car body.
Yes, I
and,
do.
Expose the car body and block out the background.
Right, the background and the tires in this case right
And then
here.
the ink you're using is so transparent out of your airbrush that it colors it, but it doesn't cover it.
That's correct. And at the very finish of this, I'll spray a Krylon crystal clear spray on it, which intensifies the transparency and brings the ink line actually to the top.
Now, this vellum is somewhat transparent itself, so if you were going to put this in a frame, then you'd probably put a white backing behind it and mount it, and then
That's correct.
Finish the drawing.
Right. If the piece was not being used for a magazine where they peel it off, I'd remount it and then frame it up. And
Now, this next one is a finished poster, and there's obviously some large reference material coming from that.
yes, this.
Now, the lettering, of course, is put in when they print the poster, the scar up
Right.
shows the people. That's put in later on. You know that's coming, so there's a window
Yes.
there to put it into.
Because I have designed the whole thing already. So I have a lettering friend of mine who puts this together on his computer, all the lettering and positioning, and gets that all ready while I'm doing the illustration. This was for a series for Wellcraft, their Square division, and it was sports celebrities, like Chuck Norris races these boats, and Emerson Fittipaldi has a boat too, so they were starting a series on these.
So you start with photographs of the man's face and his body style, Chuck Norris kicking out.
That's correct.
That's something that somebody gave you some photographs, you really didn't have him to work with.
No, usually you do not have time to actually meet the person or sit down and sketch them. You usually always work with photographs.
And the boat itself, probably somebody had that photographed for you. And
That's
now
correct.
Here's the material and go from there.
Yeah.
Now, as the selection for the water pattern, that sort of squared out piece of water, that worked pretty well as far as design, fitting the horizon line, and here comes the water.
Right. We needed some kind of graphic shape coming in there instead of, because we needed this area open for the lettering, and the lettering had to be on a light
The
background.
water coming off the back of the boat, that's pretty dynamic, but how you studied water drawing to make that fit?
Yeah. Well, that was just, I didn't really study water. From the photograph, of course, they had certain shots of water coming off the back of boats, and I tried to emulate that through.
Well, you're reinterpreting what you see, and this is
Right.
the case for you're not tracing a photograph, you're redrawing the
Yeah.
thing based on the dynamics and perspective of what's in the photograph.
Right,
But
this is, at the end of the illustration, you become very creative. You start splattering stuff, you start using electric erasers to get highlight spots, and airbrushes to do that, and toothbrushes to do splattering. And that's the fun part, actually, is the end of the illustration.
accessories. Well, let's look at the piece that's all framed up. This is a commission piece. Someone owns these cars, wanted you to make it a permanent part of a wall collection. Nice framing, man. Now, these cars are owned by the same person, right?
Yeah, he owns a stable of about 22 of these vehicles, mostly Rolls-Royces. He owns a large grain company in Kansas, one of the largest in the country. And that's not his house. I just thought that house was fitting for the feeling of the cars. So he had me paint his
Now,
vehicles.
you have to make some decisions here design-wise. Obviously, the cars are well done, and the reflection and the chrome and that sort of thing. For example, the tire in the front of this Rolls-Royce, you don't see rubber. It sort of goes from the white wall into the bottom shadow. You're using the shadow there as part of the design element.
That's right.
That's obviously experience that you had and found successful, but where do you decide, okay, I'm going to stop tire and start, ink wash here?
Well, you do that. I do it for the simple reason that I don't want it to look exactly like the photograph. Why paint it like a photograph is what I say. Now I'm trying to put some creativity, some art back into this thing. I mean, if I wanted the tire to show and everything, I'll just take a picture of the car.
Do you have detail overall, or like some artists will put detail like in the front of the car where the headlight and grille is, and then the detail gets less as it goes back?
Yes.
It looks like your detail goes
Right.
pretty far back.
Because No, I think what I understand you saying is I go in and out of detail. I mean, some parts of the car are very detailed, some are not detailed at all. This particular piece has a lot more detail on the vehicles because he wants to see what his cars look like.
This, the airbrushing, I just want to cover that one more time. The final work you've done, like around the sun and the house itself, there you've laid frisket on and just do a very light airbrushing around what is now becoming the glow of the sun.
Right.
And where else are you airbrushing for the background? I see splatter. Now, is that a toothbrush?
This is all usually done with a toothbrush. Airbrushing, again, at the very end, I tint like the fenders and everything with an airbrush. And this here was tinted with an airbrush, but this was all without frisket, all this stuff in there. I just kind of went trying to warm it up as I went into this area.
So some of it, without using frisket.
The frisket was on the sun, and then I sprayed directly into the sun, which you got the overspray on the outside of the sun.
When the piece is all finished and you cover the Krylon spray, that brings the glow up a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes it really intense and much brighter, and the ink line comes up quite nicely, and the colors are very vivid.
Okay, there's some things on the table. Let's look at just to see some more variety of work. For example, this is Stewart, right? Jackie Stewart?
Jackie Stewart, little portrait I did in Road and Track. I mean, this is a good case here. I did about 5 drawings, but they only used three of them, and this was one that they did not use. But I sold this piece, the original, to Jackie Stewart.
Well, naturally.
Because he saw it at a show.
So, that's me, I'll buy it, yeah.
So it paid off anyway.
Yeah. Now, your design here with the checkerboard, now that's checkerboard is black and white flag for the racing business, is behind his ear there.
Oh, yes.
Darken that in. Is that the motif you're using here for that checkerboard?
Yes, it is. It's just, but you notice I don't have the actual black and white in there. It's really kind of subtle.
Now, pieces like some of the magazine work you do, this one out of for the Road and Track magazine.
Yeah, these are a styling analysis. And this one was for the Q45 Infinity, and they did it over, the whole book is on the Q45, and you know, you go through several things. Anyway, I did the 2 center pages on the styling analysis, and we wrote it all out.
Do they tell you, I want a red car in front and a white car in back, or did
No.
you decide to emphasize foreground, background?
I do that myself. I select the colors of the vehicles that are going in the illustration.
Now, in this case, you hand-lettered the information
Right.
there as well, right?
This case, I hand-lettered it. In this other case, they typeset it. This was for the Subaru SVX, right there.
Now, did they say we're going to talk about the wheel and the grill and the car itself?
Yes.
Or, so you have some idea what you're going to
Direction.
set up before you get going?
Yeah, they give me a direction. We want to see the front of a car, a 3/4 back view of a car, part of a wheel, and then it's up to me to put it in the composition that's pleasing
Now,
to
that question, the composition,
Yeah.
for example, this piece, now a lot of things we're going to see are almost montage. In this case, there's cars coming together in a race, but sometimes setting up a montage is a pretty good challenge as to what goes where.
Right.
Is that just experience coming out, or do you...
Yeah, this is just experience, believe me. I usually do 3 or 4 different montages so they can select from them, and then we go from there. And it's, you know, remember, I've been drawing like 18 years now, so in the beginning I wasn't very good at that, but now I'm pretty adept at it.
Well, let's look at some of the materials you use. You're obviously using inks and pen line work. Why don't you step over there where you
Sure.
keep your things lined and show us just what materials. We're not trying to sell stuff here,
No.
but yet there will be some names show up here.
Okay, here we go. This is usually, excuse me, one moment here. The ink line drawing, I usually use Pelican inks. This is
Pelican, for your experience factor,
for
has been successful?
yes, it seemed to work the best. It's the special inks, special brown is fairly permanent,
Now, do you use brown ink because your name is Brown?
Yeah, nah, I don't do that.
Is that something
Everybody
you deal with?
comments on it, but I do not do that. And then for most of the coloring, I use rotary artist colors. And they seem to work quite well. I used to use Dr. Martin dyes, but they seem to fade quite a bit, say within a 4-year period, if you don't have a UV cover on it. And these are very permanent, non-toxic, and you have about 12 colors. And from these 12 colors, you can mix about 500 different variations.
Now, you use them with brush, with...
Yes,
pen,
with brush and the airbrush.
and load up your airbrush.
That's correct. And then here we have Dr. Martin's Spectralite. And I can mix these rotary colors with the Spectralite also, which works really well. But these are much more transparent. The rotarines are much more transparent than the acrylics.
Now, you're pretty much exclusive with this ink style. You don't go into acrylics or oil or other medium
No,
for your work.
no, I've tried them all, but I just decided that this works best for what I use them for automobiles.
And so now your style, as far as the pre-sketching and the airbrushing and the spattering, plus the vellum look that you get, that style is going to show up on whether it's automotive or butterflies or whatever.
That's true. If I do portraits for art, yeah, right, flowers, doesn't matter. It's going to show up.
Good. Well, maybe we ought to step over one of these walls and see some examples and hear some war stories of some actual
War
pieces.
stories. Okay.
Dennis, let's look at some of the things that you've done recently.
Right.
As these pieces that we see on the wall here, let's talk about this Seize the Day. Nice term. Recent movies seem to have used that a lot. Tell us a war story on that.
Well, okay, this Seize the Day, this is great because I did this painting overnight.
Now that's 24 hours
That's
overnight.
24 hours overnight. My rep in New York heard that Mazda all of a sudden won the Le Mans in France. He called Mazda up and said, well, what are you going to do? They said, what do you mean what are you going to do? He says, you know what you need? You need a Dennis Brown illustration or a poster. He said, hey, that's a great idea. So Eric called me, and the ball was rolling in. They didn't have a photograph of the car. They only had a little Polaroid of this automobile. And they FedExed it out to me. And I received that, and I just went from there. And I
So
said,
this started from a Polaroid rather than a full...
Polaroid, a little shot of the car. It was all blurry, and I couldn't even hardly see anything. It was like half-inch wide on the Polaroid. All this is kind of like made up. This is all part of the design. They had a newspaper clipping of these two drivers who were in the race that won this particular Le Mans from another race, and I used that for scrap on that. But other than that, the whole total painting was just kind of like all made up, designed in about
Now
24 hours. This is great.
There, you got it right there.
Yeah.
The Dunlop Bridge, that's part of Le Mans Speedway anyway, so you just picked that from some other photograph.
I knew that that was at Le Mans also. I had scrap on this other stands and so forth.
So then they say, here's the car, or a rendition of the car. The colors are orange and green, and away you go. Of course, the renown and some of the things that are on the car, you see that from the photograph.
That's right.
The lettering as far as numbers.
The half-inch photograph. This is. I actually blew this little Polaroid up on my Xerox machine, and that's how I got it to at least the original painting is actually only 11 by 14, and then they blew it up this size for the poster.
Now, the drawing, you see some of the baseline drawing coming up in here.
Mm-hmm.
As you get down to it, now I can see like colored pencils here. That's towards the end. I'm sure you're putting that on.
That is absolutely towards the end. All these extra lines are done towards the end. The tinting is done at the end of the...
Now, all your work is hand done. You don't use
No.
straight edges or compasses or...
Even on these so-called ellipses that you thought I used a stencil, but I did it by hand.
Point out the airbrush and give us the color. You kind of see that, but let me show me where you've used airbrush to tighten it up.
In these purples and these yellows, around the edge here are all airbrush.
So you just,
All along the side of the car. I had painted all the orange and the green and everything else with a regular brush, and then it was all white here, and I just tinted it with purple on the one side to give it a cool feel.
and so as you begin finishing, you're adding the color pencil for the highlights of the lights themselves
That's right.
to warm those up.
Yes.
And
Little airbrush up here in the sky.
yeah.
to
Now
go-
this is just drifting off here. I mean,
Right.
you've covered
Simple.
some of that up, but now it's just
Right, it's just very simple line work. The main focus of the illustration, of course, is all down here in the car.
this white wet paint that you smear. How do you get? That's virtual smear, isn't it?
That's a smear.
Yeah.
Same
Oh,
with
the
here
movement of chrome.
on there, yeah. To give it a little movement.
Now, I'm
along-
curious, the reaction of the Mazda people when they saw this. Is it, gee, this is great, or, you know, is it accurate, or do you have to kind of live with what's left?
They said, gee, this is great. I was really lucky. No
Some you win,
changes.
some you lose, huh?
No changes. They just thought it was wonderful, and they had the people go to the agency, and the people actually from Mazda thought it was wonderful, so I
Yeah.
lucked out.
Yeah, that's,
And blowing it up also made it much looser and quite nice, and it gave a really creative look to it instead of a real tight, you know, too tight of a painting.
now this next one from Valvoline.
Right.
That's, what's the background on the material on this one?
The background of the material on this one, my rep gave me a possible 10 different drivers that could win the race, and Sunday night, I was watching the race, and when Scott Goodyear was almost going to win this thing, I went, oh, I'm not going to get this work. I'm not going to have this job. But all of a sudden, Unser won it, and he was one of the last people on my list of 10 possible winners. So I had the scrap on the car, which is a street car. It's not the Indy car, and there's reasons for that. So you see the logos and for Valvoline. And we sold the rights. My rep and I actually produced this, and we approached Valvoline and Bosch, and they both picked the image up and used it several different ways in promotion for their companies.
So that was kind of speculative on your part. If
Right.
If they said it's nice, but no thanks.
That's
you
right.
Just have yourself a nice
That's
picture
right.
on your wall.
We put out the money out of our own funds that we have in our little corporation.
Now, did they do that based on, we like this picture, or they says, well, Dennis Brown is a known name in automotive illustration, let's listen to him and pay attention, you know, is it, or a little bit of both?
I think it's a little bit of both. They saw it was a little different than what they're used to. They're really used to really tight type of drawings. They thought a little loose drawing was really quite nice, and they got very excited about it. And we had this printed on T-shirts, and we had it done for, like I said, for Bosch. They changed the different images, the image area on the Bosch one, and added several portraits of different drivers that had won over several years for Bosch. But Valvoline kept just this image here, and then they had Valvoline on the bottom side.
Great, let's go around the corner and see a couple of pictures of antique cars. Pictures of, well, they're antique, they're ones racing,
Right, they
one's
are antique.
Now, this one, it's showing a great deal of your architectural rendering ability as far as the background from Meadowbrook Hall.
That's right. This was every year at Meadowbrook Hall in Michigan. They have they pick one artist out of 12 that go there every year to do the main painting, and I was selected in '91 to do this. This painting always has to have a representation of Meadowbrook Hall in the background or somewhere reflected in the car. Then they have a specific car that they had, and this year was the Accord, of course, and I did the front entryway, all in my style with the ink line first, and then using the rotary colors, and then finishing up with the airbrush rotary color.
That looks a lot tighter than the ones we just saw, though. Is that,
Well, the reason for that is this painting was done like 40 by 60, the largest one I've ever done in my media. And so when they shrunk it down, everything kind of tightened up.
Ah.
So.
well, every brick is
Great,
there.
great piece. And I sold the original at an auction they had on Saturday night.
How do you control so that the foreground doesn't melt into the background? Well, all that detail in the background, there's a lot to look at back there. How do you keep the foreground from
Well,
becoming the background? or mixing
Well,
with it?
mixing with, this is a lot more intense, actually. And this is just basically really simple line work up here.
Mhm.
And this is more finished. And this is like I just faded this out with light washes and so forth.
Yeah.
And I also didn't reflect all the building into the automobile, otherwise it would become so terribly busy.
Yeah. You got a nice reflection here, but because you're not looking at everything.
I just picked up a little bit of the cobblestone road down in the bottom down there and in the hubcaps, so forth like that.
Now, did you have the car in that position, or did you have a picture of the building and a picture of the car and work them together?
Yeah, I worked them together. I had two separate photographs. They sent me a front shot of this building, and the person who owned this automobile had shots that Chrysler Corporation had taken of his car, and I used those and put them together in a nice creative design.
Was that car sitting on cobblestones, or did you add the
No,
cobblestones?
I added the cobblestones because it's flagstone. It's like this type of stone on the ground. But I'd like the cobblestones.
Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah.
All right, this last one is again from Meadowbrook.
Right. This is a Ferrari 375, and the reason it's orange instead of the Ferrari red is Jim Kimberly of Kimberly Clark Paper Company. He used to drive this car in the 50s, racing it, and he couldn't stand the Ferrari red for some reason, so he painted this car orange, and he won all kinds of races with it. And so they found this car stored away about a year before this, in 1988, and they restored it to its original condition. So it was going to race in this race in Michigan, historical races, which is in conjunction with the Concours show over here, and so that's why it's orange. But
Now, the tree in the background, that's part of the scenery from the Meadowbrook area.
yeah, right. They wouldn't have the tree on the racetrack.
Yeah.
It's just too dangerous. But I put it in there anyway, just as a compositional hold down, because I was trying to balance out some of these other things. And up here, I just kept everything quite, simple, just simple line work, very muted colors, by putting all my intensity down in here in this dripping, hot orange color. And there's the Ferrari red is in the background, because that's another Ferrari. And then this was just kind of all made up here, just little trees. And that comes from my architectural days.
Yeah. Well, good, Dennis. Appreciate you showing us around the studio. There's an awful lot of things you can learn from a practicing illustrator, not only from their artwork, but for some of the techniques and things that they put together. Of course, as we look at the painting or illustrations, paintings, we can see the work as it's finished, and then you're talking about how some of the interim things happen. That makes it interesting. Of course, the war stories of photographs and whether the headlight's in the right place or not, that's always fun with automotive work as well. But,
yes, and they do question you on that, believe me.
Take $5 off on the headlights, a different kind, right? Well, great. We appreciate your showing us around.
You're welcome.
We'll look forward to seeing more of your work.
Okay, thank you very much.